Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
The barren millionaire married the maid, and everyone laughed at him until she gave him 2 children. Richard Almeida sat alone in his office, gazing out over the vast scenery outside the window of his mansion. Despite his immense wealth and power, these things seemed to bring him no joy. For many years, his only companions were a few servants and his housekeeper, Isabella, a woman who had been with Richard since he first started building his career. She was the one who understood his empty life better than anyone. Isabella, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a serious demeanor, took care of Richard with unwavering dedication. She had long harbored a special feeling for him, though she never dared to show it. To Isabella, Richard was the reason she continued to live and give her all, despite the fact that he had no idea about her feelings. In her eyes, she was the only one who truly deserved to be by Richard's side and to understand him. One day, as Richard was returning from an important meeting, he happened to see an old, broken-down car in the middle of an empty road. Although he was not usually the type to pay attention to things around him, he decided to stop and help. In the pouring rain, Richard met Camilla, a young woman with tired eyes but a spark of resilience. She was a single mother, struggling with her old car while her 2 children, Mark and Lucy, shivered in the cold inside. For some reason, Richard found himself drawn to this woman. He quickly helped her repair the car, and in those brief moments, a strange feeling began to stir within him, a warmth he had long forgotten. When he looked into the innocent eyes of the children, Mark and Lucy, Richard felt as though he had found a missing piece in his life. Even after parting ways, that strange feeling lingered in his mind. A few days later, unable to shake the thought of Camilla and her children, Richard found a way to meet her again. He invited Camilla to his mansion, offering her a job as a way to help her secure a stable income and support her children. Though hesitant, Camilla eventually accepted his offer, recognizing it as a good opportunity to provide a better life for Mark and Lucy. Camilla's presence in the mansion completely transformed the previously gloomy atmosphere. The laughter of the 2 children, Mark and Lucy, filled the house with a joy it had never known before. Richard began to feel the warmth of family, something he had never experienced. He spent time playing with Mark and Lucy, helping Camilla care for them, and found happiness in simple moments. But this new dynamic was far from pleasant for Isabella. Seeing Richard happy with Camilla and the 2 children, Isabella felt her heart ache. The love she had long harbored for Richard was now shaken. Isabella grew increasingly resentful, especially as she realized Richard was developing feelings for Camilla. She could not accept Camilla's presence in the house, the woman who had captured Richard's attention and disrupted the life Isabella had painstakingly built beside him. Isabella began to watch Camilla's every move, paying close attention to the smallest details to find any fault. Sometimes, she openly displayed disdain and resentment toward Camilla, assigning her physically demanding tasks or giving instructions she knew were nearly impossible to fulfill. Each time Camilla fumbled or hesitated, Isabella couldn't hide her satisfaction at Camilla's struggles, knowing Camilla wouldn't dare protest for fear of losing her job. As time went on, Isabella grew increasingly obsessed with the thought of driving Camilla out of Richard's life. She not only wanted Camilla gone but also wanted to ensure that Richard would never think of her again. Isabella began to devise more cunning plans to tarnish Camilla's reputation in Richard's eyes. One evening, Isabella sought out Richard's distant relative, Carlos, an older man with an air of authority and a distrust of outsiders. Isabella stoked his suspicions about Camilla, making him feel worried for Richard. Carlos trusted Isabella and began to interfere, wanting to learn more about Camilla to protect his nephew. This left Camilla not only dealing with Isabella's cold stares but also facing scrutiny from Richard's family. Day after day, Isabella continued to sow seeds of misunderstanding between Richard and Camilla. On one occasion, she intentionally misplaced an expensive item in the house and subtly implied that only the newcomer, Camilla, could have taken it. She quietly spread these rumors among the other servants, causing them to begin looking at Camilla with suspicion. Unaware of what was happening, Camilla started to feel confused and uncomfortable. She worked diligently, ignoring the whispers around her, but her self-respect and spirit gradually suffered. She didn't want Mark and Lucy to face hardship, so she endured the discomfort, but the constant surveillance weighed heavily on her. Though Richard was busy with work, he couldn't help but notice Camilla's unusual demeanor. But he simply assumed she was adjusting to her new job, oblivious to the schemes brewing under his roof. As time passed, the atmosphere in the mansion grew increasingly tense. Camilla no longer felt as comfortable as she initially did. Each time she appeared, Isabella found ways to criticize her, impose unreasonable demands, and create a stifling environment. Camilla grew weary of the scrutiny, but she dared not speak up, fearing it would upset Richard. For her, this job was her hope for providing a better life for her children. Isabella became increasingly crafty in her schemes to push Camilla out of Richard's life. She secretly met with the other servants in the house, those who had been with the family for a long time and were loyal to her. By fabricating negative stories about Camilla, she sowed seeds of doubt and disdain among them. One of these servants was Marta, a middle-aged woman with ample experience and unwavering loyalty to Isabella. Following Isabella's lead, Marta began to treat Camilla coldly and contemptuously, seeing her as someone unworthy of setting foot in the mansion. But Isabella didn't stop there. She continued to find ways to put Camilla at a disadvantage. One morning, she intentionally left a gold necklace in Camilla's room while Camilla was working. Later, she feigned panic, calling everyone to search for the missing necklace. When it was discovered in Camilla's room, Isabella put on a disappointed face, reluctantly stirring up suspicious looks from everyone. Camilla was utterly bewildered, trying to explain that she had no idea how the necklace got there, but no one believed her. Marta and the other servants whispered among themselves, casting scornful glances her way. Richard, busy with business matters, only heard a brief summary of the incident from Isabella. She downplayed the situation, not wanting him to dig too deeply, yet subtly hinted that Camilla might be taking advantage of his trust. Richard felt a slight discomfort, but since he trusted Isabella and didn't want to escalate the matter, he merely reminded Camilla to be more cautious with her work. Camilla gradually felt like a stranger in the very place where she worked. The whispers grew louder, and the scrutinizing looks from others weighed heavily on her. However, wanting to keep her job and protect her children, Camilla tried to remain patient, staying silent and continuing with her work. She found solace only in Mark and Lucy, but even so, she felt an ever-growing sadness and pressure. Not stopping there, Isabella reached out to a close friend, Rosa, an influential older woman in social circles. Rosa agreed to help Isabella spread unfavorable rumors about Camilla, suggesting that she was an untrustworthy woman with a complex past. This rumor started to spread, and several friends within Richard's circle also heard it, stirring negative opinions about him allowing someone like Camilla into his mansion. One evening, Richard hosted a small gathering at his home and invited some close friends. It was an opportunity for him to show off the mansion and extend his hospitality. Isabella seized this opportunity to further her plan. She pretended to be friendly with Camilla, asking her to prepare the dishes for the event. Under Isabella's watchful eye and the gaze of the guests, Camilla grew flustered and nervous. The tension made her accidentally drop a dessert plate, causing a loud crash in the quiet room. One of the guests, Mr. Alberto, a wealthy businessman and longtime friend of Richard, frowned with disapproval. Isabella immediately took advantage of the moment, acting as though she had already warned about Camilla's lack of competence. Richard noticed his guest's displeased expression, and though he said nothing, he felt irritated. This incident gradually created an invisible wall between Richard and Camilla, making her feel increasingly isolated and ostracized. After the party, Richard called Camilla into his office and sternly reminded her to be more careful with her work. For the first time, Camilla sensed a cold distance in his gaze. She tried to explain that the mistake had been unintentional due to her nervousness and pressure, but Richard only nodded silently, not even looking at her. Camilla's heart ached, unable to believe that the man she admired could be so easily swayed by whispers and suggestions from others. Isabella stood outside the door, listening to everything, with a satisfied smile on her face. Her plan was slowly working, turning Richard and Camilla into strangers under the same roof. She knew that Richard was beginning to view Camilla less favorably, and this gave her immense satisfaction. She was confident that if things continued this way, Camilla would leave the mansion on her own without needing to be told. Camilla, despite her efforts to remain strong, began to feel despair. She looked at her sleeping children, her heart filled with worry and sadness. She didn't know how to protect herself and her small family when it seemed that everything was turning against her. But deep down, she knew she couldn't give up, for Mark, for Lucy, and for her own dignity. Seeing that her plans were gradually succeeding, Isabella decided to intensify her schemes to make Richard distance himself from Camilla even further. She wanted to leave no room for Camilla to defend herself or rebuild any trust. In the days that followed, she secretly planted more evidence to make Camilla look incompetent in Richard's eyes. One morning, as Camilla was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, Isabella walked in with a displeased look, holding a tablecloth with a large stain. She raised the tablecloth and coldly said, "Camilla, can't you be more careful? This tablecloth is one of the most expensive pieces in the mansion, and now look at what you've done." Camilla looked at the stain, feeling both puzzled and humiliated. She knew she wasn't responsible for the stain, but she had no way to prove her innocence. The other servants nearby began whispering, believing that Camilla indeed wasn't capable of meeting Richard's expectations. Richard walked into the dining room at that moment, seeing Isabella speaking to Camilla and catching some of her complaints. Though he didn't want to make a big deal out of it, Isabella's hints had made him feel uneasy and a bit doubtful of Camilla's abilities. He shook his head slightly, advising Camilla to be more careful in her work, then walked away, leaving Camilla with a sense of despair. This incident was only one of the many times Isabella deliberately created uncomfortable situations for Camilla. She often set overly demanding or vague tasks and then returned to criticize Camilla when she couldn't meet them. For Camilla, each day felt like a battle, yet she didn't dare speak up, fearing she would lose the one job that allowed her to support her 2 children. One day, Isabella decided to escalate her plan to a crueler level. She secretly contacted a man named Javier, someone with whom Camilla had had a tumultuous relationship in the past. Isabella knew that Javier was a nasty, aggressive man who had hurt Camilla and was the reason she left her old life to seek a better one for her children. Javier appeared at the mansion unexpectedly, shocking Camilla. She didn't understand how he had found her, but didn't suspect that this was part of Isabella's scheme. Javier spoke in an arrogant, mocking tone, even bringing up Camilla's painful past right in front of Richard and Isabella. "Camilla, didn't you tell them about us?" Javier said, raising his voice so everyone nearby could hear. "We were quite the pair, remember? I just came by to see what you've done with your life." Camilla felt trapped, dark memories flooding back as she glanced helplessly at Richard, who was standing silently, watching. Though Richard said nothing, his cold gaze and silence made Camilla feel as though she was being judged. She tried to explain to Richard that Javier was part of a past she wanted to forget, that she had no contact with him anymore, but Isabella's scrutinizing eyes and Richard's silence made her words seem meaningless. Isabella looked on with a satisfied smile, seeing Richard's growing mistrust toward Camilla. She turned to Camilla with a cold tone, saying, "Camilla, if you want to preserve your good name, you should choose your acquaintances more carefully." After this incident, Richard began to distance himself from Camilla. He no longer stopped by to talk with her and the children as he used to, gradually withdrawing and keeping his distance. Camilla felt this change sharply, heartbroken as she watched Richard become deeply affected by Isabella's insinuations and manipulations. But Isabella didn't stop there. She continued her attempts to undermine Camilla in Richard's eyes. She pretended to be concerned for Richard, subtly suggesting that perhaps he had been too hasty in bringing Camilla into the mansion. Remarks like, "Can we really trust her?" Richard gradually increased his suspicion. The following months were tense and painful for Camilla. She not only endured Isabella's torment but also saw Richard, whom she respected deeply, steadily drifting away from her. Even Mark and Lucy, though young, sensed the heavy atmosphere. Their once bright smiles grew quieter, and Camilla's heart ached as she felt powerless to protect her children from the injustice. Camilla knew she had to stay strong, but the pressure from Isabella and Richard's coldness made her feel as though every path was blocked. Every time Richard passed her with a distant look, her heart shattered a little more, while Isabella looked on, satisfied with the results of her schemes. Noting how her plans were pushing Camilla closer to despair, Isabella decided to take things a step further. She understood that Richard had started distancing himself from Camilla, but she wanted to ensure there was no remaining affection between them. Isabella wanted to erase Camilla's presence from Richard's life entirely. This time, Isabella planned a more elaborate scheme. She reached out to an old friend, Fernando, a well-known lawyer and a close family friend of Richard's. She asked Fernando to create a fake file about Camilla's past, filled with false information and allegations that she had been involved in illegal activities. Isabella knew Richard trusted Fernando and would easily be swayed by these seemingly official documents. A few days later, during a conversation, Fernando casually mentioned Camilla's past to Richard. He pretended to bring up doubts about why a woman like Camilla would need to move to the city and work under difficult conditions. At first, Richard tried not to believe entirely, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Isabella's and Fernando's suggestions echoed in his mind, causing the image he had of Camilla to grow blurred and untrustworthy. While Richard wrestled with his conflicting feelings of trust and doubt, Isabella decided to make one final move to sever the bond between Richard and Camilla completely. She hired a man named Antonio, a shady character who would do anything for money. Isabella instructed Antonio to meet Camilla at a cafe near the mansion and act as if they had a close connection. Antonio, posing as an old friend of Camilla's, even held her hand and talked to her warmly and familiarly. As Richard happened to pass by, he saw the scene. He stood frozen, unable to believe his eyes as he watched Camilla seemingly enjoying a friendly and intimate conversation with another man. Richard's heart felt as if it shattered. He had hoped that Camilla was genuine, someone who could bring the warmth of family he had longed for, but this sight completely destroyed his trust. Isabella, with a sympathetic look, approached Richard and spoke in a soft yet mocking tone. "Richard, I've always wanted the best for you. Maybe you've been too trusting of someone unworthy. Sometimes, what we see isn't necessarily the truth, but in this case, I'm afraid we have no choice but to accept reality." Richard said nothing, nodding coldly. A mix of anger, pain, and disappointment flared within him. Without waiting for an explanation from Camilla, he decided to end everything. Returning to the mansion, he made a harsh decision, instructing Camilla to leave without needing any further discussion. He simply said one cold sentence. "I don't need any excuses. I've seen everything." Camilla stood frozen, feeling as if her world was collapsing around her. She tried to explain that the man was just an old friend she had coincidentally run into, but Richard wouldn't listen. His cold, angry stare made all her words seem meaningless. Camilla felt her heart break as she saw the man she trusted and cherished so easily believe the rumors and misunderstandings, without giving her a chance to defend herself. In the days that followed, the mansion returned to silence, but the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Isabella could not hide her satisfaction now that Camilla and her 2 children were gone. She knew she had succeeded in eliminating the woman she saw as a threat. Richard, though outwardly appearing strong, felt emptier than ever. Every time he passed the room where Camilla once stayed, memories of happy moments with the 2 children would flood back, leaving him unsettled. Not only that, but Mark and Lucy, 2 innocent children, had also become victims of Isabella's jealousy and cruel schemes. Every time Richard remembered the sound of their laughter filling the mansion, he felt as though he had lost a part of himself. But his pride and anger prevented him from admitting that he might have made a mistake. Isabella continued to stay by Richard's side, seizing this moment to strengthen her place in his life. She didn't stop comforting and caring for him, causing Richard to become increasingly reliant on her as his only close confidant. In Richard's eyes, Isabella was the one who had always been loyal, never leaving him, unlike Camilla, who he now believed had betrayed his trust. However, deep down, Richard couldn't completely forget Camilla. No matter how hard he tried to bury the memories, images of her gentle smile and the warmth of being around Mark and Lucy lingered, weighing on his heart. He felt as though he had lost something precious but didn't know how to reclaim it. Seeing Richard's inner turmoil, Isabella became even more determined to erase all traces of Camilla from his mind. She knew that with just a few more reinforcements of the idea that Camilla was a deceiver, Richard would forget her forever. As time passed, Camilla's presence in Richard's mind gradually faded, though the beautiful memories of a small family he once imagined haunted him each night. Despite his efforts to forget, Richard's feelings of emptiness grew deeper, and he found himself becoming more closed off and distant from everyone around him. Isabella, always by his side and dedicatedly caring for him, seized the opportunity to capture his heart. She arranged everything meticulously, from meals to small gatherings with close friends at the mansion to pull Richard out of his gloom. To everyone, Isabella appeared to be a loyal woman, understanding Richard better than anyone and always there for him in difficult times. No one suspected that behind this dedication lay a carefully calculated scheme. One afternoon, as Richard was in his office, Isabella entered holding a small notebook. She explained that it was an old diary of hers, and she had decided to share some of her private feelings with him so he could understand her better. In the diary, Isabella had written about her unrequited love for Richard over the years, a love she never dared to express. As Isabella read, her eyes filled with tears, stirring emotions in Richard. Although he did not have romantic feelings for Isabella, the image of a devoted woman who had quietly sacrificed for him touched him with gratitude and guilt. He realized that, all this time, Isabella had been by his side, while Camilla had only come and gone, bringing hope and then leaving him with pain. With careful words, Isabella planted the idea in Richard's mind that Camilla had never truly cared about him, but had only taken advantage of his kindness to secure a better life. She reminded him of rumors about Camilla's past, hinting at how she had used his generosity to support her 2 children. Richard listened silently, feeling his heart close off. The doubt and bitterness that Isabella sowed were like a flame, burning away every fond memory of Camilla in his heart. Not stopping there, Isabella presented other evidence she had prepared long before. She reminded him of Javier, the man Camilla had once been involved with, and suggested that she might still be in contact with him. Isabella framed everything in a way that made it impossible for Richard not to believe that Camilla was indeed untrustworthy. One Sunday, Richard invited some close friends over to the mansion for lunch. Isabella organized the event flawlessly, creating a joyful atmosphere to help Richard forget his troubles. During the meal, she subtly spoke about loyalty and gratitude, expressing her pride in standing by Richard's side through the years. One of Richard's friends, Mr. Manuel, an older, experienced businessman, listened to Isabella's words with a hint of surprise and curiosity. He gently placed a hand on Richard's shoulder and said, "Richard, perhaps you've been too trusting of someone unworthy. Sometimes, blind trust can become a burden and hinder growth." Manuel's words hit Richard like a powerful blow. Though he still remembered the happy moments with Camilla deep down, Isabella's and his friends' veiled hints made him feel more certain that his decision to cut ties with her was the right one. Seeing Richard gradually accept the notion that Camilla was unworthy, Isabella felt even more confident in her plan. She continued to host gatherings, inviting Richard's close friends and family to the mansion, each time subtly planting stories that would erode Richard's trust in Camilla entirely. Since leaving the mansion, Camilla had been trying to rebuild her life. She worked hard to provide for Mark and Lucy, but she was still tormented by the misunderstanding with Richard. She once thought he was someone who understood her, but now all she had left were painful memories and disappointment. Though she knew she couldn't return, Camilla kept handwritten letters expressing her feelings, letters she had never sent to Richard. Meanwhile, Richard grew colder, immersing himself in work to forget his sorrows. Outwardly, he no longer thought of Camilla, at least on the surface. Isabella's presence in his life grew more significant, and she gradually became the person he trusted most. The stories Isabella concocted convinced Richard that he was fortunate to have learned the truth about Camilla before it was too late. Nevertheless, a void lingered deep within Richard, one he couldn't fill. Each night, when everyone had left, he found himself alone in the vast mansion with a feeling of emptiness that was hard to describe. Despite trying to erase all memories of Camilla, the sound of Mark and Lucy's laughter echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. Richard began to doubt whether his decision had truly been right, but he pushed the thought away, dismissing it as a moment of weakness. Isabella remained by his side, always ensuring that Richard never escaped her influence, ensuring that his image of Camilla would forever remain a tainted memory. Time passed, and Richard buried himself deeper into work, seeking solace in deals, meetings, and extravagant parties to fill the void within. Yet nothing could bring him the peace he once felt with Camilla and the children. Outwardly, Richard appeared content with his life, but inside, he felt the weight of an invisible loss that clung to him. Noticing that Richard occasionally drifted back into thoughts of the past, Isabella decided to take one final step to erase Camilla entirely from his memory. She invited Richard on a trip to a distant beach, where they could relax and enjoy life without any bothersome distractions. Though hesitant, Richard thought that a vacation might help him forget his lingering memories, so he agreed. On the trip, Isabella grew even closer to Richard. She tried to create a familial atmosphere similar to the one Camilla and the children had once fostered. Isabella filled their time with conversation, sharing memories from the past and plans for the future. She wanted to build the image of herself as the only person who truly understood and cared for Richard, unlike Camilla, whom she had firmly painted in his mind as a betrayer. During a romantic dinner by the beach, Isabella gently took Richard's hand and said, "Richard, I am truly happy to be by your side. I don't ask for anything but to take care of you, to bring you happiness. I just hope you understand that not everyone is as trustworthy and loyal as you might think." Isabella's words sounded sweet to Richard's ears. He didn't reply, only nodding with a faint smile. But inside, her words seemed to affirm the decisions he had made. Richard began to believe that he was indeed fortunate to have Isabella by his side. He convinced himself that perhaps Camilla had never truly belonged in his life, that she had come only to take advantage of him. Returning from the trip, Richard threw himself entirely into his work, deliberately distancing himself from any memories of Camilla. To his friends and family, he appeared to have reverted to the cold and determined Richard they had known before. However, in the late nights, when the mansion fell silent, Richard found himself unable to shake the lingering thoughts of Camilla. It felt as though a part of his life had been stolen, a void he couldn't quite explain. Isabella, realizing that Richard hadn't completely let go of Camilla, decided to take one final push. She secretly placed a family portrait in Richard's office, a painting that resembled the dream he once wanted to build with Camilla and the two children. She told Richard that this painting was something Camilla had left behind before leaving, claiming it was a cruel joke meant to mock his loneliness. When Richard saw the painting, he felt as though he'd been betrayed all over again. Rage surged within him, and all the emotions he'd suppressed for so long exploded. He couldn't believe that Camilla could do something so cruel. In his mind, the image of Camilla was no longer that of a gentle and loving woman, but of someone cold-hearted and deceitful. He decided to erase everything related to Camilla, from the items she once used to the memories they shared. Isabella was satisfied to see that Richard had completely severed ties with the past. She continued to manage everything in the mansion, always by Richard's side as his most loyal companion. Without any doubts left, Richard placed his full trust in Isabella, seeing her as the only person who truly understood and cared for him. He thought that, at last, he had found someone worth trusting, someone who would never betray him. Meanwhile, Camilla and her two children had gradually settled into their new life. Despite the hardships, she had moved past the pain and continued on, hoping to build a better future for Mark and Lucy. Yet, deep in her heart, she couldn't shake the bitterness of being misunderstood and cast aside by the man she once trusted. Even though Richard had managed to push aside all feelings about Camilla, he could not completely escape a sense of emptiness within him. Every time he saw a happy family, his heart would ache, as if reminding him of what he once had and lost. However, his pride and ego prevented him from ever admitting that he might have made a mistake. Isabella now had full control over everything in the mansion. She was certain that Richard would never see Camilla again or even think about her. Her plans had succeeded completely, and she was content, knowing that Richard now belonged to her forever. But fate still had a surprise in store for Richard. Deep down, the memories of Camilla remained like a smoldering flame, waiting for the day it might flare up and reveal the truth. One evening, Richard sat in his study, the dim light casting shadows across his tense face. The feelings of emptiness and haunting memories of a family still clung to him, no matter how much he tried to banish them. One night, in a dream, the image of Camilla and the laughter of Mark and Lucy came back to him vividly, as though the memories had never faded. Richard woke up, his heart racing, a sense of confusion overwhelming him. He wondered if he truly understood what had happened. The next morning, Richard walked into the kitchen, where Isabella was preparing breakfast. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Isabella, I want you to show me the evidence you mentioned about Camilla." Isabella was momentarily startled, but she quickly regained her composure. Smiling softly, she replied, "Richard, I only wanted the best for you. But if you want to look into it again, I'll arrange the documents for you." From that moment, Isabella began to feel uneasy. Throughout the day, she did everything she could to keep Richard busy, but he kept asking about Camilla's past and insisting on seeing the evidence she had once shown him. Eventually, unable to avoid it any longer, Isabella handed Richard the evidence she and Fernando had fabricated. Richard sat alone in his study, carefully examining each document. Initially, he intended to just skim through, but the more he looked, the more inconsistencies he noticed in the evidence. Picking up the phone, he called Fernando to verify the information, but the conversation only fueled his suspicions. "Fernando, are you sure about the contents of this file?" Richard asked seriously. Fernando hesitated before replying. "Richard, I only did as Isabella requested. She told me you needed these documents to protect yourself. I don't actually know the details about Camilla." Richard hung up, a cold feeling spreading through him. He suddenly realized that he had trusted Isabella too blindly without verifying anything for himself. A wave of anger and bitterness surged within him. What he had once believed to be the truth now felt clouded and uncertain. Unable to remain idle any longer, Richard decided to reach out to people who had known Camilla to uncover the real story. He started with Rosa, a woman who had once been close to Camilla. During their meeting at a small cafe, Rosa shared stories about Camilla's difficult life and her bravery in raising her 2 children alone. "Camilla is one of the most genuine and resilient women I've ever known, Richard," Rosa said with a serious look in her eyes. "She never relied on anyone and always worked hard to take care of her children. I don't know what rumors you've heard, but they don't reflect who Camilla truly is at all." Rosa's words left Richard speechless. He began to feel ashamed of the way he had treated Camilla. A deep sense of regret and sadness slowly took over his heart. From a dark corner of his mind, memories of Camilla surfaced more clearly, making him realize that she had never taken advantage of him. She had only wanted to bring him the happiness and warmth of a family he had longed for. Returning to the mansion, Richard confronted Isabella. This time, his eyes no longer held the trust and admiration they once had, instead, there was suspicion and disappointment. "Isabella," he said, his voice tightly controlled. "I spoke to some people about Camilla, and I'm starting to see that things are not as you told me." Isabella was momentarily thrown off, but she quickly regained her composure and tried to justify herself. "Richard, I only wanted to protect you. You saw the evidence I provided, they were all reasonable. You shouldn't trust the words of people who don't understand the situation. Richard shook his head, his gaze resolute. Isabella, I was wrong to take your word without verifying anything myself. But that stops now. I'm going to investigate the truth about Camilla on my own. And if I find out that you lied to me, I won't forgive you. Isabella fell silent, her mind racing. The careful plans she had laid were starting to unravel. She tried to maintain her calm and offered more excuses, but Richard had lost his trust in her and didn't want to hear another word. He walked out of the room, not giving Isabella a chance to say more. That night, Richard stayed awake, reflecting on everything that had happened. He felt tormented by his misunderstandings and resolved to make amends with Camilla. A fierce determination grew within him. He had to find her, apologize, and bring her back into his life. He realized that only she and the children had brought him true happiness. The next morning, Richard left the mansion without informing Isabella. He went directly to Rosa's home to ask for Camilla's whereabouts. Understanding his sincerity and regret, Rosa decided to help him. Camilla is working at a small shop in the city. You should go to her quickly and speak from the heart, Rosa advised him. Richard nodded, knowing there was no time to waste. He set out with a heart full of hope, believing he could right his wrongs and help Camilla see his true feelings. Richard moved swiftly through the crowded streets, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. Finally, he stopped in front of a modest shop on a street corner, the place Rosa had told him about where Camilla worked. His heart raced, and his hands trembled slightly as he stepped inside. The moment he saw Camilla organizing merchandise, an overwhelming wave of emotion washed over him. She looked thinner and tired, but her eyes still radiated resilience. Camilla looked up, and her face froze when she recognized Richard. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure, but the pain from past wounds made her expression cold. "What are you doing here, Richard?" Camilla asked, her tone indifferent, though her eyes betrayed her lingering hurt. Richard stepped closer, his voice softened. "Camilla, I came to apologize. I misunderstood you and believed things that weren't true. I was blind and trusted lies. Please, give me a chance to explain." Camilla turned away, refusing to look at Richard. "Explain. Explain that you didn't trust me, that you threw me and the children out over false accusations. Do you know how much that hurt me, Richard?" Richard felt the pain in every word she spoke, and he knew he had no excuse. All he could do was bow his head and speak honestly. "Camilla, I was wrong. I don't know how to make up for this, but I want you to know I deeply regret it. You and the children are the most precious thing I've ever had." Camilla looked at Richard, her eyes revealing both the sorrow and exhaustion within her. She still loved him, but the wounds he had caused ran deep. She couldn't easily forgive, but she couldn't deny her feelings either. "It's too late now, Richard. You chose to believe someone else over me," she said, her voice shaking. "Trust, once broken, is difficult to regain." Richard looked into her eyes, filled with profound remorse. "I know, but please give me a chance. If there's anything I can do to make it right, I'll do it, for you and the children. I want to make up for the pain I caused." At that moment, Mark and Lucy ran over from the back. Seeing Richard, Mark hesitated, while Lucy stared at him with wide eyes. They seemed to recognize him but didn't fully understand why he was there. Richard knelt down, gently calling the children's names. "Mark, Lucy, it's me, Uncle Richard." He tried to keep a smile, but his eyes grew misty as he looked at their innocent faces. Mark looked at his mother, then back at Richard, his voice tentative. "Uncle Richard, why are you here? Do you still want us with you?" Mark's innocent question struck Richard like a dagger. He nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes, Mark. I want to be with you and Lucy, to see you smile and hear Lucy call me every day." Lucy smiled, stepping closer to Richard and whispered. Will you really not leave us and mommy again? Richard took her hand, his voice sincere. I will never leave you and your mother again. I promise. Camilla stood there, watching Richard with the children. She felt her heart soften, unable to suppress the emotions she'd held back for so long. Seeing Richard interact so gently with Mark and Lucy, she realized he was truly remorseful. Although there was still much pain, she knew their feelings for each other remained. Finally, Camilla sighed and spoke. Richard, you may visit us. But that doesn't mean I forgive you so easily. If you really want to make things right, you'll have to prove you deserve our trust. Richard felt a glimmer of hope. He nodded, his voice resolute. I'll do everything, Camilla. I'll show you that I've changed, that I'm ready to rebuild from the ground up. Camilla and the children looked at Richard, filled with complex emotions. Though there were lingering doubts, they couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope. For the first time, Richard felt he might have a chance to make amends and start over, to clear the misunderstandings and rebuild the trust he had lost. Richard left that day with a fragile but powerful hope. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to do whatever it took to prove his sincerity and bring the happiness that Camilla and the children deserved. In the days that followed, Richard put every effort into making amends and proving his sincerity. He spent time visiting Camilla and the children, bringing small gifts for Mark and Lucy, simple things, but filled with thought and care. He worked to rebuild his relationship, not only with Camilla but with the two children he now saw as family. One afternoon, Richard invited the three of them for a walk in the park. Lucy held his hand tightly, her eyes shining with joy, while Mark, though still a bit reserved, was beginning to open up to him. Camilla walked beside them, silently observing Richard's every action. She sensed the change in him and understood that he genuinely wanted to make up for his mistakes. As they rested under a tree, Mark turned to Richard, his eyes innocent as he asked. Uncle Richard, do you really want to be our dad? Mark's unexpected question stunned both Richard and Camilla. Richard stayed silent for a moment, then he took Mark's hand, his voice soft but certain. I want that more than anything in the world, Mark. I want to take care of you, Lucy, and your mom. I want us to be a real family. Lucy cheered, her innocent joy evident as she exclaimed. So we'll be a real family. We'll never be apart again, right, Uncle Richard? Richard nodded, embracing both children, his eyes welling with emotion. He looked up at Camilla, his gaze meaningful. Camilla, I know my mistakes can't be easily forgiven. But I hope that, in time, you'll see my sincerity. Camilla sighed, her voice gentle yet firm. Richard, I'll never forget the hurt you caused, but I also believe people can change. I've seen your efforts, seen how you care for Mark and Lucy. If you truly want to build a family, it takes more than words, it takes actions. And time will show if you're serious. Richard nodded, his heart filled with newfound hope. He knew Camilla was giving him a chance, and he vowed never to squander it. As time passed, Richard continued to care for and bond with the little family. Each visit, he brought warmth and a genuine smile, leaving behind the coldness he once held. Gradually, Camilla's trust in him began to return, and Mark and Lucy increasingly saw him as a true father figure. One sunny Sunday, Richard organized a special picnic for the whole family. He prepared everything early, setting up seats and arranging their favorite foods. The children were ecstatic, running around with excitement, while Camilla observed quietly from a distance, her eyes shining with happiness. At last, she saw in Richard the man she'd hoped he would become, a man who cherished, loved, and cared for his family. As the picnic came to an end, Richard suddenly knelt before Camilla, his expression earnest. He pulled out a small ring, his hands slightly trembling as he looked up at her. Camilla, I know this proposal may seem sudden, but I want you to understand that I've truly changed. I want to spend my life caring for you and the children. I want us to be a real family. Camilla, will you marry me? Camilla choked up, tears threatening to spill over. She looked at Richard, the man who had once hurt her, but who now offered her hope and faith in a happy future. She gazed into his sincere eyes, understanding that he genuinely wanted to make things right and build a good life with her and the children. Finally, Camilla nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "I accept, Richard. I'll give us a chance to start again." Mark and Lucy cheered with joy, hugging both of them. The family's laughter filled the air, blending with the warm afternoon sun, marking a meaningful new beginning. From that day on, Richard became a true husband and father, always there for his family. Every day, he spent time playing with Mark and Lucy, helping Camilla with daily meals and caring for them in every way. Their home became filled with laughter and joy, with no more misunderstandings or pain. Richard had found the true meaning of happiness, and he knew he would never let it slip away again. To him, Camilla and the children were not just family, they were his lifeblood, his love to cherish and protect for life. One weekend afternoon, as the family sat together in the garden, Richard looked at Camilla and the children, his heart brimming with happiness and contentment. He whispered to Camilla, "Thank you for forgiving me and giving me this chance. I'll do everything to be worthy of your love and trust." Camilla smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "You're the person my children and I need, Richard. Together, we'll build a happy family." Isabella stood from afar, watching Richard's happy family, her heart weighed down with sorrow. The schemes and complex plans she had crafted now felt meaningless. She realized that Richard had found true love and family, something she could never give him, no matter how hard she tried. One early morning, Isabella quietly packed her things. She no longer wanted to stay in a place that only reminded her of her failures and jealousy. Before leaving, she left a short note on Richard's desk. "Richard, I once tried to keep you for myself, but I realize now that I don't belong here. Live happily and cherish those who truly love you. Isabella." No one knew where Isabella went, but she left the mansion feeling a sense of liberation. The story of Richard, Camilla, and Isabella serves as a profound lesson about trust, regret, and the true meaning of family. It reminds us that trust must be built and maintained through understanding and honesty. Misunderstandings can cause unexpected pain, but sincerity and effort can bring a chance for happiness. The story also cautions against selfishness and envy, for holding on to someone without true love only leads to loss and loneliness.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.